Greetings, and welcome once more to the Dracovin Empire. Are you ready to dive back into Golarion, the setting for Pathfinder? If you are, I can take you on a journey both through time and space as the host, Candace Narafan Dracovin, to learn about today's topic, the Mualijae. I'm probably butchering the name, so apologize if I am, because Mualijae is both a collective group and ethnicity, but is also a nation, and a people that technically don't exist anymore. We'll discuss it. But if you're ready to travel to Golarion through my time-space dimensional portal that I can open up, you just have to grab my hand. But if you do, I do expect a little bit of a tip here before we go. Make sure that you are subscribed over on the YouTube side of things, or go over there if you haven't yet, and let me know. What do you think about this? Would you want to explore the ancient nation and the people that were once these three groups of elves together? Because now these three sub-ethnic groups are the successors to it, but Mualijae's gone. You can talk about them as a whole, but yeah, it's kind of gone. We'll discuss it. Let's go. The portal. We've arrived. Sorry about that stop. We almost ended up in darkness there for a second. So, if you want to dive in and learn more about the Mualijae, I recommend a number of books here. There's technically 3. The Mwangi Expanse deals with them a little bit because they are based on its history, but it's another one of those things is a lot of ancient nations from the Expanse and the region of Grund are talked about, but not dived into as much as the modern day people in the Expanse. It's based about the new things. But the World Guide provides a little bit, and so does the Elves of Golarion, because, hey, these are elves. So who are the Mualijae? Mualijae. Mualijae are basically the successor group, the group that became the 3 nations and ethnic groups of elves in the Mwangi Expanse. Basically, if you want to refer to all the elves of Mwangi Expanse, you can kind of call them Mualijae, but really they want to be called by their very individual groups now. They've separate. They become their own things over the thousands and thousands of years. And these are the elves that actually remained on Golarion, one of the groups of them, when Earthfall happened, while the others fled to Sovarian on Castroval. So, yes, and the name Mualijae is both the name of the ethnic group and the nation that was in the Mwangi Expanse. So that's very important there too. Let's talk about those 2 groups there, because it's, as I said, nation and people. Let's start with the nation, because this kind of gives the history of this. And I'm going to go through the various subgroups here. Here we go is our first one, the Mualijae elf of the successors. I'm going to use their pictures here. So, it was during the Age of Legends, so this is the time of the rise of Aslan, Thassalon, all those great things that elven explorers reached the Mwangi Expanse. They founded the nation of Mualijae, and they spanned much of the Mwangi jungle. Now, they had conflicts with a lot of humans in this area, which is kind of futile for the humans that were there. The legend of the jungle being dangerous came about during this time period, mainly because of the Mualijae. Granted, it's not that the jungle isn't dangerous, but extra levels of it, and these humans that probably weren't part of any major civilization at this time, minor tribes and groups that were living in Grund, in the northern area, visiting the jungle, trying to explore, kind of settle in the jungle, and then having problems, goes to that. This is the majority of what we know about the Mualijae, and I think this is one of the problems about them. We know about their fall, we know about their end, and I'm going to talk about that in a second, but the nation itself, yeah, it's hard to tell. Are there probably ruins and things in the jungle? Yes. But some of these ruins are probably still controlled by the successors to the Mualijae, honestly speaking. Much of their culture is evolved from the successor groups. Remember, elves live a lot longer than humans. Their culture has evolved since the Mualijae, each of them separating out a little bit, but a lot of what was Mualijae is in these elven groups that remain now. They are successors that have adapted their cultures a little bit, but they are still similar enough to understand where they all came from. So, yeah, even 10,000-ish years later, there's still these connections with Mualijae in the modern-day culture of the elves today. So there's another thing about the nation that means it's kind of not dead, but also dead. The nation itself did fall apart because of the Great Darkness, Earthfall. The Mualijae elves did have a prophecy that was part of their past future threats. And they basically traditionally passed on through oral storytelling. And then, basically, the elves fled to Castroval when Earthfall happened in negative 5393. The Mualijae elves stayed behind, they defended their nation. It became a great reason. The dragon god Dahak attempted to invade the universe through the elf gates. The gates that the elves had used to travel between their regions, to travel to their own home planet. So basically, the Mualijae were still connected with the rest of the elves on Golarion through the elf gates. They were connected. They could have fled to Castroval. They had an elf gate. But the Dark Dragon invaded during this chaos of Earthfall. And the clans of the Mualijae basically battled, sacrificed themselves to seal him between the blades within the Hunter Gate. And coalesced around the Ludra Hood of Astral's Ring. That deals with an adventure path that deals with the entire thing. Some 200 years later, in negative 5014, they also discovered the demon-infested ruins of Nagasa. And some of them stayed by to investigate the ruins and evict the demons. The rest feared basically corruption, believing the prophecy resided within the elves themselves, and moved on to the shores of Lake Octa, where they lived in tranquility until the emergence of the Gorilla King Usuru. And this is where the division comes. Those that were those descended from those that directly fought Dahaka and stayed behind to guard that. Those that stayed behind to guard Nagasa, and those that settled on Lake Octa. These were all Mualijae, but each of them settled on a different job. Something that they needed to do. Some of them needed to watch and make sure Dahaka didn't get an opportunity to rise again. Gotta stop that. Hey, this demon city, it's probably a bad thing to have here. Maybe we should do something about it. Hey, this looks like a really great lake to live around. Oh, hey, there's this guy called the Gorilla King here in Usuro. We probably should do something about that. We've been living here for a while now. Basically, the great evils that came about during the time of the Great Darkness, Earthfall, the Age of Darkness, splintered Mualijae. And certainly speaking, fractioned and destroyed much of their civilization. You have to think that perhaps they were more tribal in a lot of ways than your average elven people. That they would, live more in tune with the expanse and how natural it could be. But they still had access to goddamn elf gates. They still had their civilization that existed here. And what of that civilization? We don't know. They might not have had great stone structures. It could have been great things of made wood, places where the trees had been, manipulated through magic that have gone away now because of time. The people splintered. The nation splintered. The nation disappeared. It is a very hard thing to research and learn about today in Golarion because they were not the same kind of great city builders we think of when we think of many of the ancient human civilizations. They aren't building these massive monuments. Maybe there's something out there, but just not to the degree of many of the other ancient nations. And so the Mualijae nation is mostly relegated to history. And what little bit of it's found is that. It is one that would be fascinating to explore, but we don't. So, we move on to look at the Kalaja. I'm sorry, not the Kalaja, the Ukujae. This is the Ukujae. Right. Let's talk about Mualijae as a people. So, we now understand why they splintered. Basically, each of three major clan groups saw a different threat within the Expanse and settled in that place to deal with that threat. Those that remained at Nagasa, they were the first to splinter from the Mualijae. They become known as the Alija. Those that had basically been on the forefront of sealing Dahaka became known as Ukujae, and basically took on the responsibility of binding and destroying the trapped manifestation of Dahaka. They're basically like, there's a manifestation, we eventually have to figure out a way to get rid of it, but we have to make sure it stays there. And those that eventually settled in Lake Octa and then started to face the tyranny of the Gorilla King become known as the Kalaja. These groups lost contact with their elven kin on Golarion and with Castroval. They lost the elf gates. They became estranged even from each other in some cases. Each of them evolving their own culture. The Mualijae recording the prophecies and histories on walls of Nagasa out of a sense of necessity that their Mualijae did not share. The Mualijae basically having a disdain for this because this is a divergence of traditions. They were very oral tradition hit, and this is basically recording things down. The Mualijae believing that the Mualijae suffer from corruption, from Nagasa's demonic influence. All of these things are deep things there. The Mualijae being warrior scholars that basically have bore the effects of Avestan colonization and honestly, basically using the expanse, enslaving people of the region. They've become the brunt of it. Fighting against things like the Apsis Consortium, that they become hardened and suspicious against outsiders. The Mualijae turning to rituals of meditation and cleansing, the unburdening, and basically, and them, Mualijae, actually having many of the traditional methods and storytelling from the Mualijae remaining behind. So sort of like each of them has an aspect of the Mualijae left in them, but they are just all successors to them and have all evolved under their circumstances. And that with a Mualijae, we do have to talk about the legacy of these people and the nation that was there. So, we have the Mualijae, our warrior scholars, who have a position of fear and reverence within the forest that they guard, engaging in guerrilla warfare against the Apsis Consortium and various Avestinian forces that has gone on for many decades as it is now. And they will continue to fight the great fight to basically protect the people there. That is their kind of purpose that they're seeing as of this thing there too. As the Mualijae have basically continued their fight against the Gorilla King. But hey, guess what? The Gorilla King has been murdered and, Usuro not necessarily cleansed, but in a good shape. So now they have more opportunities to fight against, the Mualijae have more opportunities to help with this. And the Mualijae, who are the ones that have been basically dealing with the Dahaka, and dealing with the outside world too. And the Northwest, that's the Western regions. In the Northwest, we have the Mualijae. They're protecting the locals, elven or otherwise. Yes, the main raids from Usura have stopped, but there's still bandits, demonic forces, still things that are there that have to fight against, and they're battling against it. Allying themselves with the Orcs of Nine Walls and other groups that are in that region to fight against these forces. And of course, in the north, Mualijae, the ruins of Nagasa. They ensure explorers that basically don't get in there and wake up some malevolent forces. And interestingly enough, with the redemption of Nocturnla and the cult of the Redeemer Queen, there's become a new change within the Mualijae. Nocturnla, who had a big old giant pyramid in that area, has been redeemed to a goddess. And the cult of the Redeemer Queen, who worshipped her non-evil side, even when she was a demon lord, basically have been kind of getting together with the Mualijae, who are being like supercharged because they're like, hey, if Nocturnla could be redeemed, then there's nothing so corrupted that it could not be redeemed. If a demon lord could become a goddess and be redeemed, anything can be. We can take care of this problems in the city. We can finally root it out. That's what's going on with the successor states. And I do want to preface that I do want to talk about all three of these things on their own. They're their own nations, they have their own places, they have their own beliefs, they have their own build-ups. I've kind of gone over them briefly now, but each of these deserves a video on their own. They're successors of Mualijae. But the thing is, I thought talking about the Mualijae first would be the most important. There's a good reason behind it. They all come from here. The great nation that they came from was here. Yes, the Mualijae and Mualijae we know more about than the Mualijae. Yeah, but I think all of them do deserve me to visit them on their own at some point in time. But for now, I did want to kind of do this, combined all of them, where they came from as a people before they split, and the great nation that was there. Because again, there's probably aspects of the nation that are hidden deep within the jungles of the Expanse. They were the first major nation during the Age of Legend. Not to say that it might have been other nations and other groups that existed before the Age of Legend or during the time period in that region afterwards. But during the Age of Legends, the Mwangi jungle was theirs. And this great nation fell. Age of Darkness, all the great destructions that happened, all the corruption, all the problems, fell, splintered, became what we have now of the elves of the Mwangi Expanse. They are successors. They in many ways remember much of that. there's also so much lost in amongst their oral traditions, their ways, them not being the same, having jobs, having lives, having situations, means so much of what was Mualijae, so much of what was connected with those old elves and the rest of Golarion and Castrovel in those ancient times is gone. 10,000 years is long. It really is. And even with the long age of elves, a lot is lost. But I hope you enjoyed learning all about the Mualijae, the people and the nation. Interesting, deep. But if you want to see more of my stuff, check me out over on Twitch or over on YouTube. Twitch, I record all my tabletop-related stuff. I have live plays, Fall of Amazon Wednesdays at 8. I have a discussion talk show podcasty thing, discussing tabletop Saturdays at 6. All that's my big tabletop-related stuff. I do other variety content, gaming, hanging with friends, just chatting, all that kind of stuff that a normal streamer does. But if you just want to stick around here for the tabletop content, you can get it all on the YouTube side of things. Now, granted, I don't mind you catching me live, but if you can catch me over on YouTube, that'd be great. If you are over there, please do remember, like, subscribe, and of course, let me know what you think about this. Would you want to explore some Mualijae ruins? You want Paizo to let us know more about this ancient group? Because again, a lot of their culture does exist within their successors, but there's probably things that are interesting about them that are gone. I would love a big book about, like, deep diving into some of these lost empires, because then we can know about maybe some of their sites and some of their things, and this is just another one of the great lost empires I would love to know about more. We know about some of them, but there's a lot of them we don't. Please do remember to check out my social medias for updates, what's going on, things like that. Discord's the best. And of course, until we dive back into Golarion or another place, another role-playing game, I bid all of you out there a deep and wonderful farewell.